You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined by Oliver Camacho. All right, this week, it's fall. Time for pumpkin spice and football, and the OBS team shortlists of what we want to see in the 2024-2025 opera season. And speaking of people you'll want to hear, we'll have a free throw from Oliver's super crush, Huw Montague Rendall, as he is getting set to make his house and role debut as Billy Budd in Vienna. Plus, we have a Philly-style send-off for George in the listener mailbag, along with a pair of listener field reports from New York City and Nicaragua. And in the 2-minute drill, it's not just the MLB postseason, it's also International Opera Awards season. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign, send us a voice memo, or email us your hot takes, mailbag at operaboxscore.com, or just record your thoughts using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. You know, Oliver, some things never change.
Yeah, like us not having any co-hosts. Only in the second episode into season 10, our biggest season yet. We do have a contribution from Ashley, who is traveling for work, I think for work or a vacation. I forget, but she's traveling. She has a little sports talk to contribute to the top of the show because you need sports talk, and I'm not there, she says. Aja Wilson just became the first player in the WNBA to score 1,000 points in a single season ever.
Wow. I think it's really impressive that she scored 1,000 points in a single season. You know, we're now in our 10th season, and the only points we've scored were in that one game of horse where all we found out was that George didn't know how many handle operas there were. Yeah, we'll never let it go, even though he's gone. But you know what? There's still a chance to earn a lot of points. Let's talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
So this past weekend, Rigoletto opened up at Lyric Opera of Chicago. And I think it was just 2 weeks ago before we took our Labor Day break. What I was saying is like, maybe I'm going to finally check into this DG Stage or Medici TV, one of those streaming services, to like get my opera fix, because it was that little bleak time in the calendar where there really isn't a lot of opera happening. But what is it now? It's mid-September. And there is a ton to see already in Chicago. They start so early here. And we thought, why not we give some of our, picks for what to check out this coming season. We have some hyper-local picks because we are in Chicago, but we also can make some recommendations for other parts of the United States of America and maybe some in Europe, right?
We'll reach far afield, and
yes. We won't go to what's the Azerbaijan, or where did Sarah Connolly do that opera in?
Oh God, was it
United Emirates or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, Dubai. Yeah,
we have not researched that thoroughly. Apologies to all of our Dubai-based listeners. Let us know what you're looking forward to in the upcoming opera season. Let's start with Chicago. Obviously, a lot going on in Chicago. At the Lyric, I always want to shout out the new operas, which we talked about before. We've got Janine Tesori's Tazewell Thompson's Blue, and also The Listeners, which we have talked about extensively over the last few weeks.
We'll hear more about later on today.
Absolutely. So I don't want to talk too much about that, even though that I would say at the Lyric season, that is my #1 thing I'm most excited about. I do want to give a shout out to Matt Cummings. He couldn't be here, but he would never forgive me if I did not recommend the Sandra Radvanovsky concert. Sandra Hive Rise Up, I believe are the words he would say at this point in the recording. That's going to be a great concert. She is something to hear live. Let me tell you what, she'll pin your ears back.
I poop you not when I tell you that on my 2 different dates in a row, I had 2 potential gentlemen to come with me to see the opening night of Rigoletto at Lyric. Both of them canceled. I had enough notice to try to find somebody else, but in the end, I couldn't find a third person to come with me. And thanks to the director of media relations at Lyric Opera Chicago, I got to sit next to Sandra Radvanovsky at Rigoletto.
Amazing.
I could not believe it. I was like, what is happening.
Why
so
isn't she co-hosting with us right now?
I know. You know, she has her own podcast, like Screaming Divas or something like that. Maybe the picture that was taken of us sitting together will be the image for this episode. We'll
Amazing.
see. Yeah, but she's a hoot. She's so down to earth. And, we chatted about what we thought about the opera, and she's real, and I love her for it.
And yet not on the show. That's the kind of quality we can expect from Opera Box Score in season 10. We have lots of good stuff coming up this season that I don't want to spoil, but that's another thing to be listening to is our show. Do you have any other recommendations for Lyric? Do you want to move on to the COT?
Well, yeah, no. Lyric Opera Chicago, I am looking forward to hearing Ying Fang sing Susanna and Federica Lombardi sing the Contessa in The Marriage of Figaro, which is coming up in the spring. I think it's the spring, or I don't know. It's happening sometime this year. No, maybe it's in the second set of operas in the fall. Anyway, it's happening. And, the production is Barbara Gaines, who used to be the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, director. I don't know about that production, but I'm happy to hear Ying Fang sing anything.
Yeah.
But sooner than that, there's this first time thing happening in Chicago, which I think is actually pretty brilliant. Lyric Opera Chicago is doing Fidelio.
Right.
And you may or may not know that the subject matter, the original inspiration of the play that inspired Fidelio actually inspired other operas. I think maybe 4 in total, maybe 5. One of them is by a late 18th century or early 19th century composer named Ferdinando Paer. It's called Leonora. And Chicago Opera Theater is putting on Leonora with Dame Jane Glover conducting and friend of the show Larry Edelson as stage director. And it's actually his first season as general director of the company. And they did intend for these two operas to be, performed as companions to each other, which I think is that's a great idea.
This is the kind of the first time Chicago Opera Theater and Lyric Opera Chicago, the two most important companies in Chicago, have done any sort of like strategic collaborating, at least to my knowledge, which is always a good sign because the mentality for so long with a lot of major cities is that, is the kind of cutthroat. There can be only one kind of situation, which is something that is simply not sustainable in the current economic climate and cultural climate in general. So I'm really excited that they not only picked these two pieces, but are actively like talking about it. There's actually, I think there's a lecture maybe like this week. Maybe I missed it already. Like hosted
I think it's tomorrow.
by, it's probably already happened by the time you hear this, but they're actually like talking, comparing the pieces and like, having that cross-pollination of the audiences and acknowledging that there is cross-pollination of the audiences too. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, the audience is shrinking in general. So let's get them all on the same boat,
Absolutely.
I don't know what type of metaphor that was, but yeah, it might have worked for somebody. And finally, you have one more Chicago event here.
I do. So the CSO is doing Bluebeard's Castle. Finally, I'm so excited. It's with Christian Van Horn, friend of the show, Ekaterina Gubanova as well, conducted by Esa-Pekka Salonen. Now, I think that, operas in a orchestral setting, not always my thing. I love the staging. I love the acting. But you can do a lot since there's only 2 singers with Bluebeard's Castle. And Bluebeard's Castle, I think I said before, is probably one of my top 3 operas of all time. You would expect it to be something by Stockhausen, but I'm sorry to be a little off-brand and say that I love Bluebeard's Castle. They were going to do this, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, but there was a strike by the orchestra that canceled it, and I was profoundly disappointed. And so I'm very excited that it's coming back in this case, but they're pairing it with like Beethoven's First Symphony, which is I don't understand that pairing, but I'm extremely excited and will be there for both pieces nonetheless.
So leaving Chicago, a couple of recommendations in Detroit. Friend of the show, Emmy Pogoreltz, is making her role debut as Violetta in La Traviata at Detroit Opera. That's once again in October. Conducted by friend of the show, Roberto Kalb. Other friends of the show, Houston Grand Opera will present Il Trovatore with an all Friends of the Show cast: Eileen Perez as Leonora, Lucas Meacham as Conte de Luna, Rayanne Bryce Davis as Azucena, and Morris Robinson as Ferrando. Unfortunately, Michael Spires is not yet a friend of the show. He's singing Manrico, or the Trovatore, the troubadour, of the titular troubadour, but hopefully he'll be a friend of the show in time.
He's a friend of a show in our dreams. It really does look like we cast that one.
Yeah. I was saying, hopefully he'll be a friend of the show before this show goes up.
Yeah.
So that you can say, oh yeah, those are all friends of the show, when you go see it.
A couple of friends of the show highlights. I mean, Opera Philadelphia, big friend of the show going way back. Obviously, they're doing the listeners, which we will talk about even more in this very episode. But also they're another highlight of their season, their very affordable season, I will say, the $11 season, is Joseph Boulogn's only opera, The Anonymous Lover, which is still having its moment.
Is it his only opera, or is it his only surviving opera?
I think it's his only opera, period.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. Mailbag at operaboxscore.com.
I'm pretty sure you're wrong about that. So I'm going to say that you're wrong.
Let us know which one of us is wrong. I will also say another friend of the show, Lydia Yankovskaya. She might have abandoned Chicago Opera Theater, but she is doing a couple operas this season. She's doing a Bohème in San Diego this November, and she's doing the Steve Jobs opera by Revolutions of Steve Jobs by Mason Bates at Washington National Opera much later in the season in May. And, let me tell you, if you've been hearing us talk about Lydia Yankovskaya and you've never had the chance to hear her, go hear her music making. She is a phenomenal artist, and we'll be really jealous that you get to see her, even though she is not in Chicago anymore.
And Ashley is also going to go to San Francisco to see The Handmaid's Tale. And an Ida Mineo with a all Friends of the Show cast, Matthew Polenzani in the title role, Daniela Mack as Ida Monte, and Ying Fang as Ilia. I wonder who the Electra is in that. Probably not a friend of the show, otherwise she would have mentioned it, I'm sure.
We want to talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Opera, of course. I think the big ones for me are going to be Aina Damar, which is the Osvaldo Golijov opera, which is a fantastic piece that could only really be done justice, I think, by a larger company like the Met. I'm also very excited about John Adams' Anthony and Cleopatra, and I want to see if it can break the Samuel Barber curse. Because as we all know, the last time they did an Anthony and Cleopatra opera, things went horribly wrong. Ashley has some recommendations in that sort of larger market as well. She wants to recommend Grounded once again. It was obviously this version is 45 minutes shorter, so she says she can't vouch for exactly the same thing. But as long as the cuts happen in the second half, it's going to be a really good time, and it's just going to be with Emily D'Angelo, which is going to be phenomenal as well. Do you have, and in terms of the Met too, I also want to recommend Die Frauen Schatten, friend of the show, the opera Frauen Schatten. If you go way back in our archives, you can hear me and Harry Rose talking about that for like 3 shows in a row. It is a fantastic piece, ridiculously huge orchestra. I am legitimately counting my pennies and taking on side hustles to see if I can get to New York to see it, because I love that piece. And if I don't get to see it, I want to hear from all of our listeners how sad I should be that I missed it. Lots of good stuff happening at the Met and further afield as well.
And she wants to point out, even though we skipped over this, my bad, that at Opera Omaha, Judith Yan is conducting and Christine McIntyre is stage directing, which makes it a mostly female creative team. If we get rid of the lighting designer and the scenic designer, we don't need them. But the cast includes friend of the show, Zachary Nelson as Leporello. There are other people in the cast, obviously, but we only care about friends of the show.
Ashley also recommends, she's currently off in Scotland at the moment. That's why she's not on the show. So she was looking up what was coming up in that part of the world for all of our listeners in the British Isles area. And I'm not sure if Scotland's in the British Isles. Oh no, I'm being canceled. She says, here's a recommendation for you, Weston. They're doing Janacek's Macropolis Affair. Amazing. They're going to have Orla Boylan as the titular affair. They're also doing a production of Trial by Jury, which is going to be a double bill with Jenkins and Hession's A Matter of Misconduct. And she says, we here at OBS welcome any and all offers from the SNO, the Scottish National Opera, for tickets. Please do. I would love to go see it. I love Macropolis Affair.
Well, now that she's gotten us to Europe, I have to remind you all that Huw Montague Rendall makes his role debut as Billy Budd and his house debut at Wiener Staatsoper. That's October 26th through November 10th. Something else that interests me over there, not in the U.S. Everything that's not the U.S. is just foreign. Yeah, over there. Tales of Hoffmann at the Royal Ballet and Opera, formerly known as the Royal Opera and Ballet, with Juan Diego Flores. I believe it's a role debut for him as Hoffmann. Ermonella Yaho as Antonia. Olga Pudova as Olympia. And Alex Esposito as the four villains. Giulietta, sung by Marina Costa-Jackson and Niklaus Julie Boulian. My interest, obviously, is Juan Diego Flores. He's a singer I've followed for a long time, and it's interesting to hear how he can puff up his voice to do this. It's the most comprehensive role for a voice type, for that lyric voice type. It's stamina, definitely. It's stamina, that role. And there's also some really throat busting moments in Hoffmann. It's not for your everyday Rossini tenor. And we know that Juan Diego Flores has been doing like Werther and stuff like that. So he has been graduating into these types of roles. But I think that Hoffmann is a major step towards that kind of the extremity of the Fach.
I want to give a couple of recommendations also in Europe.
Over there.
Over there. The Bayerische Staatsoper remains a bucket list opera company for me. It's hard to even recommend something from the whole list because they have so
like
much.
100 operas.
But I think my top two that if I were able to pack up and hop over there would be Weinberg's The Passenger, which is a great Russian opera, and Le Grand Macabre, which they are doing again. I believe they premiered this production this past season, but it's been one of those things that I see it on Instagram and I'm like, oh man. Le Grand Macabre is by George Ligeti and it is so weird in just the most me possible way. It is such a cool piece. I also want to mention, coming back over here for some people who might be maybe not quite in some of the larger areas. I also want to shout out Atlanta Opera, who've really been hitting it out of the park recently. I have a soft spot for Atlanta Opera because that was the largest opera company I could go to growing up, even though it's a bit of a drive for me. And they are doing some really interesting and cool things down there. They're doing, they're up to Siegfried and their ongoing Ring Cycle, which is, would have been unthinkable, 15 years ago when I was going regularly for them. They're also doing an immersive, pair of productions of La Boheme and Rent, which are going to be like on-site opera sort of, kind of vibes, or like they're going to be like a steel mill or something. It's going to be really interesting and really cool, and has achieved kind of the impossible, making me want to see La Boheme and Rent. And they're also doing Semele, which is like also a wild choice for them because growing up they were very much a war horse only kind of outfit, but I'm really proud of what they're doing down there. And, I have a lot of friends down in that area who are always talking up Atlanta. I want to make sure I did that as well. On the other side, on the other coast, I want to mention, Seattle Opera. They're doing a world premiere of an opera or an opera-ish. They're calling it an opera, but it seems to be almost more of a jukebox opera, if you will. It's a Tazewell Thompson creation. I think we actually talked about it maybe a couple years ago and it was in production or something. It's opening this October. That consists apparently exclusively of old spirituals, which is the opera's called Jubilee, and it's about the Jubilee Singers, who were a black ensemble of singers that were formed, I believe, in 1871-ish, who are largely responsible with introducing this kind of foundational Black American music to to white audiences and mainstream audiences outside of the Deep South. And I think it's a fascinating premise for an opera for such an important part of musical history. And I think Tazewell Thompson is a great person to sort of tell that story. Well, let us know what you are looking forward to in the 2024-2025 season. You can let us know by emailing us at mailbag@operaboxscore, or you can go to our website and use the You Got Something to Say tab. We want to hear from you and know what you're looking forward to, because I know we missed something despite our best efforts.
Free throw.
Early in October, I will broadcast an interview with friend of the show, Huw Montague Rendall, for my other job, because Huw has a brand new album with the Rouen Opera Orchestra of Normandy. And because he has a commercial recording, I'm able to invite him onto that other platform. But while I had him, I asked him to talk a little bit about Billy Budd, which he is preparing to premiere at the end of October at Wiener Staatsoper. It'll be his role debut and his house debut. Welcome back to Opera Box Score.
Thank you for having me back. Couldn't believe it.
So you're in London now, and you'll soon do the Italienisches Liederbuch with Aaron Morley, who's also a friend of the show, and Malcolm Martineau. And you'll be doing your role debut as Billy Budd at Wiener Staatsoper, and it's your house debut.
Yes.
And do the Germans or the Austrians, do they care about this opera? I don't know what the relationship is to Britain.
Well, I did an interview the other day, and someone asked me, why should we not be scared of Benjamin Britten's music? So I think that probably tells you about it. It's I don't know. I don't know if they're scared of it. They just did Peter Grimes in Vienna, and I think they love the music. It's not scary music. It's just incredible music. Would we be scared of putting on Wagner in London? No.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's something so powerful about this opera. I think it has to do with just like the male chorus aspect of it. It's like there's something that, you get into your ear adjusted to all of these lower frequencies and nothing really, coming through that texture. So you have to just be okay with, harmonies that are much closer together.
Yes.
And Billy Budd has to shine somehow amidst this, and he's cast as a baritone. He is in the middle of Veer and Claggart, so he's like the human person, and he's supposed to be beautiful, but he gets this flaw. And how genius is it that in an opera we need to hear the flaw? So it's got to be a stammer.
Absolutely, because you can't do anything with it. He says my tongue wouldn't work, so I had to say it with the blow, and it killed him. It's tragic, absolutely tragic. Of course, you have to be able to hear it. I mean, we see a lot in opera too. I'm thinking about the homogeneous nature of the piece. It's kind of like water, isn't it? It's all stuck together and kind of flowing along like an ocean, really. Like we're strapped on this little vessel on the sea. It is a very interesting choice to make Billy a baritone, but it's a very lyric role. It's very high. You have lots of high arching phrases. It's not too dissimilar from Pelléas, actually, in that way. In your moments of utter joy and excitement, you sail up to these very, very high notes, and I think it's exciting as a baritone voice to have that.
I feel like there is a part that we're not really shouldn't talk about because we're like in 2024 and it shouldn't matter. But you're a very good-looking guy, and I don't know. Have you seen the productions yet? Do you know anything about? Or are they trying to capitalize on that? Are you going to be doing like the shirtless routine or?
No, I don't think so. No, it's a wonderful, very traditional production by Willy Decker. It's been there for a long time. It tells the story as the story. I don't think they try and capitalize on any pretty people or any of those kind of things because perhaps they never know who they're going to have in the role. Some some chump like me. You never know. So no, I don't think any of that crops up in this production.
Is there any explicit homoeroticism that's explored?
No, I think it's very, very below the surface as it is in the piece. It's not spoken about. It's kind of this unspoken truth in the piece that Claggett is jealous and probably in love with Billy. And that's why he wants to destroy him. Has to destroy him.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, for somebody like me who is of a certain generation. I mean, I'm not that old. Everybody thinks I'm like so old, but I'm in my 40s plus. And, I used to go to the opera and look for things that were gay. I used to have to, unravel the code to feel like I was being included in the storytelling. And I think Britten is the first composer that's canonical that really did try to make something like me feel included. Nowadays, it's like everything is so gay and like you don't have to worry about it anymore. But I think that's why Billy Budd is such an important opera to me, because it was a story that I felt like, okay, there's a little bit of me in here,
That's wonderful. I mean, and he was incredible at being inclusive in that way in all of his pieces, actually, in Peter Grimes as well, in pieces especially like Death in Venice, which I think is one of the most incredible operas ever written, actually. Turn of the Screw. Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy for you that you're going to get to do this on a big stage, but I'm also jealous that we don't have it here in the U.S., so I can more easily access it. So this is a call to action to all the intendants and general directors that are listening in the U.S. Please put on a Billy Budd and bring Huw to the U.S. Bring him to Chicago. Bring him to Logan Square in Chicago.
You said it. You said it. I'd happily come back. I absolutely love Chicago. I miss it very much.
It tips the god's cutlass and silvers the snow. But 'twill die in the dawning of Billy's last day.
Are you surprised that we didn't talk about Palace of Melisande at least once?
Supreme restraint on your part.
That was from the brand new recording called Contemplation, which is basically Huw's CV at this point. A lot of the roles that he already sings, plus some future things for himself, and a nice helping of orchestrated song. Billy Budd's Look Through the Port, or Billy's Farewell, with the Opera Orchestre Normandie Rouen, conducted by Ben Glassberg.
Yeah, you got something to say? Then yeah, all right, you can say something. This is Listener Mailbag.
Well, now that George is gone and all of our hosts are scattered across the globe, it's just you and me, Oliver, I thought we might reach into the Listener Mailbag and kind of have our listeners do the talking for us.
They provide us with the content, we just lay back.
Let's start with a very interesting report from Nicaragua from our friend Don.
This is Don Levine with a report for you people at Opera Box Score. I was down in Nicaragua for a week and a half visiting one of my oldest and dearest friends. And we were talking one night over dinner. He knows that I've been involved in the music scene in New York for many, many years. he mentioned that they were doing some musical presentations at the theater in Managua. Now, Managua, Nicaragua happens to have, of all places, the largest and best equipped stage in Central America. It's a Teatro Rubén Dario, which was built in the late 1960s, and it's one of the few major buildings that survived the massive earthquake of 1972. And it's a beautiful theater. It's kind of Spartan, but it's elegant. So I guess it has about 1,000 seats. Anyway, it turns out that the son of El Líder, the dictator of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, and his wife, Rosario Murillo, is a guy named Laureano Ortega. He's a tenor, or he fashions himself to be a tenor. He is musically trained, it's obvious, listening to him. I've heard a few things that he did, and it seemed like a nice voice, but nothing special. Anyway, they're doing a Puccini festival. The first opera was Le Ville, then they did Bohème, and I was there just in time for the third opera, which was Turandot, which absolutely floored me that they would even attempt something like this. So we go to the theater because my friend was friends with the director of the theater. We're treated like superstars. We had fabulous seats in the first ring, right dead center. And lo and behold, the curtain rises on Act 1 of Turandot. Now, it was cut, but it was a very interesting performance. First of all, it was amplified, which was crazy in a theater that size. But when I heard the soloists, I realized why. There were only two real voices on stage, three actually. The Ping, the Liu, and the Timur. El Líder's son, who sang Calaf, has a voice, but Bocelli would sound like Tristan next to him. Even with amplification, it was hard to hear him at times. He had all the notes. At times the voice was a little unsteady. You know, he's the boss's son, and he is trying to bring culture to the masses in Nicaragua. I was actually very surprised that they had such nice sets. The direction was good. Orchestra was reduced, maybe a third the size of a normal Puccini orchestra. I think they had under 20 players in the pit, if that much. It was a nice performance. I was kind of shocked. Singing is a different story. Most of the singers were totally inadequate, including Calaf and Turandot. Ping was a guy named Josue Osorno, and he actually had a nice lyric baritone voice. I was impressed with him. Timur, name was Jordi Mora, nice bass voice. The big surprise, big surprise was the Liu, Catherine Velasquez. All of a sudden, this girl opens up, and this is a real voice. She sang beautifully, musically. She did everything a Liu has to do. She handled all of the intricacies of the music. Vocally, she was on pitch. The voice had a beautiful timbre. A week later, she was in the Orfeo competition, which is a local vocal competition in Costa Rica, just for singers from Latin America. And I noticed her name in it because Kevin Godinez, who's a baritone, who's been in our Giulio Gari competition in New York, and who I'm fairly friendly with, had mentioned on Facebook that he was going to be in that competition. I asked him, well, how was she? And he said she sang beautifully. He said it's really amazing because she was basically trained in Nicaragua and had very little experience outside of the country. And he said, considering that her training was probably inadequate, she's a very fine singer. Anyway, I think this girl would be great if she'd come up to the United States and go to one of the music schools here. It was an interesting experience to see an opera there. I didn't expect it. As far as I knew, they never had an opera season. It's not a center of opera in Latin America. Put it this way, I was pleasantly surprised. And of course, I kept my opinions to myself. You guys are hearing it first now. That's my report from Managua. Take care. I hope this suffices.
Thanks, Don, to that insight on a very interesting production. You know, I think a lot of times we'll talk about a lot of these sort of mainstream opera companies across the United States and Europe, but it's always fascinating to kind of peer into a market that's in a lot of ways completely different. But I would send you down there and you can be our full-time Nicaragua correspondent anytime you want.
Well, let's hear now from Zara, who wrote to us on a recent episode. And now a first-time caller, long-time listener, sends in her own listener mailbag.
Hey there, OBS fans. Fellow OBS fan Zara Brown here, reporting from New York City. It may not be street scene, but we may get some street noise. Anyway, last night I was among those lucky enough to hear the American premiere of music from The Listeners, the opera by Missy Mazzoli and Royce Vavrick that opens the 2024-25 season next week at Opera Philadelphia. The Opera Philadelphia premiere was delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and another of the three companies that co-commissioned the work, Norwegian National Opera, was the first to present it in 2022. The opera will also be performed and recorded at the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the other commissioning house, in March, and Afton Battle, Vice President of Lyric Unlimited and Artistic Operations at the Lyric, was on the panel at the Guggenheim Museum in New York City last night, along with the composer and friend of the show Missy Mazzoli, the librettist Royce Vavrick, the director of the production Liliana Blaine Cruz, and Sarah Williams, Director of New Works and Creative Producer at Opera Philadelphia, for this Works in Process event. Since OBS has featured some wonderful interviews in recent weeks with the lead soprano Nicole Heaston and with Missy Mazzoli, listeners may have already heard some very intriguing things about this opera. For those who haven't, I'll share this brief synopsis from the program notes. A middle-class mother living in a southwestern U.S. suburb notices a hum, a high-frequency environmental noise that only a select few people, the listeners, can hear. A community organization quickly forms to solve the mystery of the hum, but when a de facto leader suggests a spiritual significance, the meetings become increasingly cult-like, ritualized experiences, and it becomes clear that this community of listeners is on a collision course of destruction. The Listeners examines the lengths to which we as Americans are willing to go in order to find a sense of place and purpose, and the way in which charismatic leaders can exploit these needs to their own ends. The Guggenheim Museum's Works in Process program provides an inside look at works that are literally in the process of creation, or a teaser for works that are about to have their premiere. Last week's sold-out event featured Grounded by Janine Tesori, which is about to open at the Metropolitan Opera House. And last night, the audience for The Listeners got to experience some key moments from the opera performed by members of the cast and cover cast, with the pianist and vocal coach Grant Lanig, head of music staff at Opera Philadelphia, in the role of the orchestra. I was especially delighted to learn that Jasmine Saunders, who joined the Lindenman Young Artist Program at the Met this year and has a simply glorious voice and talent, would be performing the lead role of Claire Devon and is covering the role in Philadelphia. The tenor Ethan Burke beautifully sang the role of Claire's student Kyle, which he is covering, and the mezzo-soprano Taylor Alexis DuPont and the bass baritone Zachary Altman, who have roles in the ensemble, performed, or one might even say inhabited, to great effect, the parts of Angela and Howard, who drive the movement that becomes a cult. Even without sets or costumes to situate us in the suburban United States, relating and relatability came across as the dominant themes of the evening. We saw Claire alone with her torment, crying out in the night to a coyote and howling along with it for companionship. We saw the moment when she risks trying to connect with a student who is struggling, and both characters learn that they aren't suffering alone. We saw Howard, Angela, and Claire making a social media post to attract new members to their group, urging them, share your personal pain, and offering to be the family their viewers may be looking for. And we heard Angela sing from the depths of her childhood abandonment and warm to Howard's assurance that her qualities would be quote-unquote useful to his movement. Everyone in some way, in melismas, in howls, in rage, in false officiousness, is crying out to be understood, which of course drives so much of this art form we love. But this opera specifically explores themes of loneliness and community in a contemporary American setting, in contemporary English. And speaking briefly with the singers about their roles at the reception after the concert, we affirmed, yes, we know people who behave this way. We know people who have this kind of trauma. These could be people from our lives. These could be us. Royce Vavrick shared some evidence that some audiences are already finding this work perhaps uniquely relatable, in that two short excerpts from the opera, both depicting high school students and both what the librettist called a little salty, had gone viral on TikTok, each with 1 million or more views and hundreds or thousands of comments expressing surprise and excitement that, quote-unquote, opera can use those words. I'm willing to bet that never have those words sounded so beautiful. The music has an unsettling, disturbing effect in keeping with a story where the characters don't know who to trust or understand what is happening to them, but it is beautifully sung, and recurring phrases and themes build as the characters' connections build, inviting the listener in as they begin to learn the language of this piece. The challenge of writing an opera about an aural disturbance is so apt. The composer spoke on the panel, as she did on OBS, about her desire to write an opera that would not be an adaptation of an existing novel, play, or film, but had a reason to exist first as an opera. This is why, even though during the pandemic delay, the author of the story treatment, Jordan Tannehill, developed the story into a novel and a screenplay, and the film version just premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, I would want to meet this story and these characters first as an opera, because it is about the human experience as a sonic and musical experience. Missy Mazzoli also noted that female potential had emerged as a theme during the writing of The Listeners. She explained that she was a part of the first generation of girls in her family who were able to choose what they might want to do in life, and how her own mother had fought to transcend the limited options on offer to women in her time and place to become an architect. At the end of the performance, we saw a video clip of the Norwegian production that allowed us a glimpse of the production design and direction that will be repeated in Philadelphia. This was such a powerful moment. Nicole Heaston, as Claire, stunningly sang a testimonial in which her face was projected over the entire left half of the screen, so we could see how fully she inhabited those dreams to be a novelist, an architect, President of the United States. So if I were taking advantage of Opera Philadelphia's Pick Your Price initiative, offering any seat in the house for $11, I would not be too worried about the location of the seat I managed to get if I knew that the production called for projections that allowed us to see moments like these in close-up. It was wonderful to hear that since this ticket program was announced, 90% of the seats for the entire season at Opera Philadelphia have been sold. That percentage has probably gone up since last night, since a pair of commuter trains from New York to Philadelphia plus an opera ticket still comes in at about the price of, say, a works in process ticket. Toi 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 to these wonderful artists, and congratulations on the realization at long last of this project.
So now you know everything you need to know about The Listeners. Go ahead and get your $11 ticket while they last. I think it's probably
Opera Philadelphia should be shoveling money at us and all of our listeners because, man,
I don't know
we
when it's
advertised...
in $11 increments, I'm not sure how much you can shovel.
That's true. I know I'm super excited for The Listeners, even more so now that I've heard all that. So, what are you doing? Run to wherever Listeners is happening. It's somewhere in an opera house near you this season. And finally, we have a very special goodbye to our very own dear departed George Cedarquist from Frank Luzi.
Well, you can imagine the dismay among the owners of the Opera Philadelphia Fantasy Football League as we gathered for our weekly tailgate and Opera Box Score listening party to hear that George is leaving the show. We're shocked. We are so sad to see you go, George. We hope you're going to continue in our league, managing the OBS team, the team you've guided to exactly 0 postseason berths, the team that frequently features a solid third-round talent as a first-round draft pick. Georgie, best wishes to you from all your Opera Philadelphia fans, and hope to see you at the drafts. And, otherwise, Oliver, Ashley, time to brush up on your fantasy.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The Angela Garrigue encore drama continues as an official of the Sejon Center questioned her characterization of the events earlier this month. The soprano conveyed her wish through her manager that there be no encores for any of the performers, including herself. However, this cannot be considered a formal agreement, said the official, adding that Garrigue did not have the authority to make that kind of call on behalf of other performers. The essence of this matter is not whether there was an encore, but the fact that Garrigue disrupted the performance, severely undermining the audience's right to enjoy the show.
The 2024 International Opera Award nominees have been announced. We'll talk about them and shout out the potential beneficiaries of the OBS bump right after the drill.
The semi-final round of the 2024 Operalia competition is set to take place on September 17th, a day after we were recording this podcast. 7 Americans qualified for the semi-final opera competition, and 2 Americans will compete in the Zarzuela Prize. By the time you hear this, you may still be able to catch the finals taking place in Mumbai, India on Saturday, September 21st. And if you don't already have tickets to Mumbai, you can watch it live on Medici TV.
In major award news, the Austrian Music Theatre Prize has announced its 2024 winners. French soprano Erika Elof won the Best Female Singer category for her portrayals of Eva in Die Meistersinger and Marie Marietta in Die Tote Stadt at the Landestheater Linz. The best male singer was German baritone Michael Fohle, who played Hans Sachs in the Vienna State Opera's Meistersinger. The best supporting role awards went to Brazilian countertenor Bruno de Sá and American mezzo and friend of the show, Kate Lindsay. Meanwhile, in Budapest, tenor Ji-hoon Park has won first place in the 6th Eva Marton International Singing Competition, which carries a €30,000 prize.
Earlier today, AGMA announced the intention of a strong majority of the Boston-based artists of the Handel and Haydn Society Chorus to unionize. The organizing singers of H&H have submitted a letter to management, part of which reads, "Our choral union will build on H&H's legacy of professional and musical excellence to the benefit of our current and future artists, the organization as a whole, and the community we serve."
In our ongoing series of reading open letters, Vance George, chorus director emeritus of the San Francisco Symphony, has responded negatively to the recently proposed budget cuts from symphony management. Quote, "These cuts are a shockingly poor sign for the chorus's future and deeply insulting to those who have given their time and talent to the symphony from the chorus's founding to its celebrated half-century. Diminishing the role of AGMA members or severely reducing their compensation would undermine the chorus's artistic integrity. The chorus as a whole is an artistic community, not a random collection of interchangeable parts."
In trade news, friend of the show, Carrie Lynn Wilson, has been named music director of the Kyiv Kamerada, replacing Valery Matyukin, the founding conductor of the institution who died last year. Wilson has been a staunch advocate for Ukraine since the 2022 invasion and founded the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra that same year.
Friend of the show and Louisiana native Paul Groves has been appointed general director of Opera Louisiane in Baton Rouge. Quote, "Paul's extraordinary career as an artist brings a wealth of knowledge and passion to our organization," says John Jackson, who's the board chair of Opera Louisiane. "His connection to Louisiana and his dedication to the art form will undoubtedly help us continue to grow and reach new heights."
Crunching the numbers, Arena di Verona has broken records with its 101st season, amassing €33,620,000 in ticket sales and performing to 417,354 patrons, down to the last patron, a full 15,000 more than last year. The venue also sold out 16 shows completely, with 4 performances of Turandot, drawing a total of 40,000 audience members alone. I know I said that wrong, but it's okay. Turandot. We'll never know.
Cancelled.
We just will never know.
On the disabled list, German conductor Christian Thielemann has withdrawn from La Scala's upcoming Ring cycle this October as he recovers from a planned tendon surgery. Simone Young and Alexander Sadi will fill in for Rheingold, but replacements have yet to be announced for the rest of the cycle.
And on this day, September 16th, in 1770, it was the first performance of Franz Joseph Haydn's Les Pescatrici. In 1800, Françoise Boldieu's The Caliph of Baghdad premiered in Paris.
I'm sure it's aged really well.
In 1810, Pietro Generali's Adelina premiered in Venice. That same year, Carl Maria von Weber's Silvana premiered in Frankfurt. In 1878, it was the first performance of Bedřich Smetana's Tajemství, or The Secret in Prague. I should have just said The Secret.
You could have.
In 1880, it was the first performance of Hervé's Le Voyage en Amérique, on the Voyage to America. That's what it was. In 1912, Leoncavallo's Gli Zingari, another title that doesn't age well, but when you say it in Italian, people don't know what you're saying. That premiered in London in 1912. 1920 saw the last professional recording of Enrico Caruso from Victor Records, made in Camden, New Jersey. And in 1959, it was the first performance of Nino Rota's Lo Scoiattolo in Gamba, a children's opera which premiered in Venice. Finally, in 1966, it was the opening of the new Met with the premiere of Samuel Barber's Anthony and Cleopatra, which starred Leontine Price. Birthday celebrations include in 1685, English librettist John Gay, who wrote The Beggar's Opera, 1887's Nadia Boulanger, born in Paris and teacher to everybody. Austrian-American soprano and teacher Erta Glotz was born in 1908. I don't know who Wayne Peppercorn was, but
he's just got a fun name.
Okay, Wayne Peppercorn. He was a composer. I don't know if he wrote any operas, but he's a Peppercorn.
He wrote at least one.
Okay,
So he's in.
Cincinnati. And happy birthday to Latvian mezzo-soprano Alina Garanca, born this day, September 16th, in 1976.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
A recording that made me really become interested in Alina Garanca's singing. That's one of her early ones with the Camerata Salzburg, conducted by Louis Langret. That is an aria from a Mozart Juvenilia. It's not actually Juvenilia. It's middle period Mozart when he was 17 or something like that. So that's Mozart's middle period. That's
a little sad, but it's true.
Yeah, an aria for Ramiro se l'Augelin sen fugge from La Finta Giardiniera. Alina Garanca, happy birthday.
I've always been a huge fan of Alina Garanca. One day we'll have her on the podcast as well. I can feel it in my bones.
So we will talk about Operalia when probably next week when we know who won. Will it be next week? Yeah, it will be next week. But we can mention right now that some Americans are competing. That's all we care about. Brittany Olivia Logan, soprano. Dean Murphy, baritone. Kathleen O'Mara, soprano. Teresa Parada, soprano. Sunli Pierce, mezzo-soprano. Meridian Prawl, mezzo-soprano, who I actually heard at Opera Theater St. Louis this past summer. She's awesome. And Angel or Angel Romero, tenor. Those are semifinalists competing in the opera category. And the two contestants competing for Zarzuela from the U.S. are Sunli Pierce and Angel Romero. Good luck, America. It's an Olympics year. We still have patriotism. You're going to bring in your Steven Nadaretsky or to finish it off, everybody, you know.
Well, speaking of the Olympics, if we're going to get really international, let's talk about the International Opera Awards.
All right, let's do it.
My most subtle transition yet. Obviously, I believe, once again, this is going to be, the winners will be announced on October 2nd. Which will be in a couple of weeks when this episode drops. But I want to talk through at least some of the nominees here because, you know, I'm always interested to see what the Europeans think of Americans, especially. And we have a couple of friends of the show on the list too. I think we had Enrique Mazzola on for a free throw. He's nominated for conductor, best conductor. We also have Simone Young, who was also nominated, which I think would be a great win.
Has she been on the show?
Well. I don't think so, but okay. I just like her.
Well, Emmanuel Haim is the other woman in the category. If you're going to mention.
Yeah, I also like Emmanuel Haim. So.
Yeah, okay. The other contestants or the other nominees are Thomas Gugais, Carlo Rizzi, and Christophe Rousset. But I guess we're pulling for Enrique or Simone.
I think so. Those are my top two. I mean, there's a bunch of good ones on this list, but I think we're probably a little bit more interested in the singers from our sort of world. Obviously, I think the one to beat, at least in the American camp, is going to be Lisette Oropeza. She is just an amazing singer.
And a friend of the show.
And a friend of the show.
And the non-friends of the show are Elsa Dreisig, Rosa Feola, Alexander Kurzak, Anna Pirozzi, and Adela Zaharia. I've never heard of Adela Zaharia, so good luck to her.
Yeah, I mean, if she gets on the show before October 2nd, we will completely back you, Adela. Just call us up.
Yeah.
Male singers, big friend of the show, Benjamin Bernheim, of course. Gerald Finley, I believe, also friend of the show. Didn't we get him on for something?
No.
No.
No, but I think Jonathan Tettleman has been on our show, hasn't he? Didn't I get a little free throw from him? Yeah.
I believe so, yes. Sometimes, when we're talking about friends of the show, I'll be like, did we really have them on, or was that just a dream I had?
I'm a fan of Cyril Dubois. Very, very my voice type of guy. But Gerald Finley is bomb.
He's so good.
Pene Patti and Klaus Florian Vogt.
Yeah.
I will say that there is a category for festivals, and none of the festivals I went to this year made it. So you can all kick rocks, but
I want to give a little shout out to Des Moines Metro Opera.
Yes,
they're kind of hanging with a lot of the big European boys, and I don't know exactly what they were nominated for because I haven't been following.
Though they did Salome, I think. That's what they did.
Yeah, I just love seeing an American company like that pop up on lists. It can be a little. One thing I will say about the International Opera Awards, I never see the Met is always underrepresented, but I think that's kind of a good thing, as I think that there's so many companies, even in the U.S., that are doing some really exciting things that are on the cutting edge, and I really love to see them at least nominated. Although we'll see who actually wins that one. In terms of opera company, we got a bunch of nominees that are, I believe, all European except for friend of the show, Opera Philadelphia. Obviously, that's the one we're rooting for, but they're going up against some heavy hitters. We got the Komische Oper, National Theatre Prague, Opera Nationale de Rouen, Opera Royale de Wallonie-Liège, and the Wiener Staatsoper.
Wow, I think your French is getting better. Congratulations. I'm not even kidding.
I just practiced because I know that I'll be seeing Oliver Camacho every week. And I'm like, oh God, I got to get the R's right. But Opera Philadelphia is going to be my pick, obviously.
Me too. They have an award category where you can vote. That's called the Readers Award. You can vote for Javier Anduaga, Ekaterina Bakanova, Piotr Bechawa, Sarah Blanche, Arturo Chacon Cruz, Asma Gregorian, Edmond Eliaho, and Ludovic Tezier. Exercise your right to vote, people. They have a Rising Star category as well. Justin Austin, Charlotte Corduroy, who's a conductor. Here's a name, Icelandic, obviously.
Arnheiður Eriksdóttir, I think.
Awesome. Mezzo-soprano. Yeah. Duke Kim, friend of the show.
Yeah.
Katia Ledoux, mezzo-soprano. Anthony Leon, tenor, who I just heard in Idomeneo as Arbace. Marina Monceau, soprano. I think I just heard her in something too. Yaroslav Shemet, conductor. William Guanbo Su, a bass, and Jasmine White, a contralto. There's a couple of recording categories. There's complete operas. Opera Rara's The Exile of Rome, or Exile from Rome of Donizetti. Your favorite opera.
Antichrist, the Ruud Landgaard opera. I did not know there was a new recording of this. It might be just a DVD, but this is one of my favorite obscure operas to bring out at parties. It's such a bizarre story, but the music is quite nice. You bring it out at parties.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Louise Bertin's Fausto, the only female composer on this list. Louise Tezé, The Girl of the Golden West.
Girls of the Golden West. That's the John Adams one.
Yeah. And Meyerbeer's Le Prophète. And the solo recital recordings, Aigul Akmetshina for her album Aigul. Golda Schultz's Mozart, You Drive Me Crazy, which I would vote for. I loved it. Marina Viotti's Mezzo Mozart. Michael Spires is In the Shadows, future friend of the show. Reinhard von Mechelen's Les Gros au Conte de Gluck. And Sayoa Hernandez's El Verismo d'Oro. All right. There's a couple more categories we're not going to get to, but you can check it all out by going to Opera Box Score and clicking on the show note links.
Yeah, let us know who you think should win. I'm always invested in the International Opera Awards. They're the only award show in the opera world I really care about. I'm always watching, excited to see who wins. And it's always an introduction to how people are thinking outside of our very American-centric opera community. It's a great time.
At some point, we're going to have to talk about unionizing and why unions keep coming up on this show. And maybe we need to even talk to an organizer about why the classical music world is suddenly I don't say they're panicking or anything like that, but I feel like a lot of organizations are, getting into unionization because maybe the marketplace is getting very insecure with so many companies, trying to solve their budget problems and not ever looking to the high salaries of the executives, but always going to cut artists.
Well, I think there's been, even outside the opera world, I think there's been kind of a reckoning since the pandemic. And this is something I have a very strong idea of. When I first came to Chicago, it was with the intention of doing theater, not opera, not even necessarily musicals. But as a result, I have a lot of people in the theater world, and there was a massive sort of tectonic shift in the attitude of a lot of workers working for nonprofit organizations and artistic organizations over the past 4 years or so, where a lot of organizations have simply relied on passionate individuals to be underpaid and be overworked universally. And when you take that sort of notion and realizing that that's what's been happening, and combine that with the financial stress post-pandemic that a lot of these institutions are facing, and realizing that the first thing that people do is cut jobs and cut salaries and do all these things. And the fact that it seems to be such a universal trend has really bubbled a lot up to the surface that has genuinely been, kind of tamped down for decades. It is a fascinating sort of conversation to have. And unionizing also works. I mean, George Cedarquist, we pushed him out. We unionized here at the OBS. That's not true. We're not paid anything for this. But it is an interesting sort of phenomenon. Is the largest wave of unionization even outside of the arts world in literal decades. So we'll see how well these catch on, how much more normal it will be to be unionized in a lot of these organizations that have traditionally not been. And I wish them all the best of luck in getting the resources that they need to live and work in today's economy and artistic climate.
Finally, I'm pretty sure this is the end of the Angela Gheorghiu news cycle for September. We'll probably get another one in a couple of months, but just to be clear, Angela Gheorghiu came very close to apologizing, but actually didn't apologize if you read her statement. She says that she deeply regrets the circumstances and that she wishes to express her profound respect and love for her Korean audiences who have paid me so much over the years. So I don't know. I mean, like it's diva antics. It's sort of entertaining. It's a little bit embarrassing for her, and I'm sure she feels ashamed. But she's too proud to actually say she's sorry. So yeah, let the shame continue.
I do appreciate, growing up, I always heard stories about these great diva tantrums happening, and they're becoming less and less common, which I think all in all is a good thing. But there are some times when I'm feeling a little messy, I'm in between seasons of whatever junk TV, Love Island thing is on Netflix or whatever. And I'm just like, man, I sure wish that someone would just throw a little hissy fit on the Met Opera stage. And, sometimes Angela Gheorghiu comes in and helps me out. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. That's how we end things around here. Let's start with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Oliver Camacho.
Shout out to friend of the show, Solomon Howard, for his portrayal of Spada Fucile in Rigoletto. It was a crazy night at the opera. Everybody was there. Eileen Perez was there. Sandra Radwanovsky was there sitting right next to me. I think that Lyric did a great job of getting people in the house for the prima and also the opening of the season. And it was also El Grito in Chicago, which meant that you couldn't drive anywhere downtown. So all those people were trapped, basically. Ivor Golovatenko, I have to say, I wasn't that excited about him singing Rigoletto because based on his Rodrigo from a few years ago in Don Carlo, I thought he was going to be too clean, too elegant of a singer to make something out of Rigoletto, but he really delivered. So Congratulations, Ivor, if you're listening, and come on the show. I also will say that by the time you hear this, it'll be too late for you to check it out. But Music of the Broke is doing Haydn's The Creation, and the solo trio, Brandon Siddell, bass baritone, I think he's bass baritone, tenor Aaron Sheehan, friend of the show, and Joelle Harvey, who I've been trying to get on the show forever. She is exquisite. She's getting into like Sylvia McNair, Kathleen Battle territory in terms of just like always beautiful tone, always technically perfect, and just the audience holds their breath like while she's singing. She killed it yesterday when I saw it. So Joelle, please come on the show.
I have a good call. I took this from a Guardian article that I happened across this past week. Apparently, an opera by Johann Christian Bach, the most underrated Bach.
More than Wilhelm Friedrich?
Okay, well, J.C. Bach is the only one who actually cared anything about opera, which makes me care about him. And he was also very influential to Mozart, which I think you would appreciate. They recently published for the first time the score of one of his operas, Lucio Silla, which I don't believe is planned to be staged anytime soon, but now it's out there and can be staged. And it's such an interesting sort of era in music history. I feel like, we're seeing a great revival of like the high Baroque stuff. But like, in a lot of ways, the latter half of the 18th century, we are not quite as invested in bringing back outside of, your kind of bigger names, your Haydns and your Mozarts and stuff like that. So I'm kind of excited, and I hope I get to see it sometime soon. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Get your voice heard and find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. That's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Woodell. Your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Your audio editor is me, and the executive producer of OBS is George Cedarquist. For our guest, Huw Montague Rendall, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you scour the internet for undiscovered works by Joseph Bologna or J.C. Bach. We're back with an all-new show next week when the star of Chicago Opera Theater's Leonora, soprano Vanessa Becerra, goes inside the huddle. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more random collections of interchangeable parts. Join us.